What up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new International Comics Crusaders. And your boy out, Megan. You see, the person right next to me is the one and only, the greatest author on earth right now. I mean, hit writer, novelist, the one and only Chris Muse. What's poppin', bro?
talking about horror, my subject. Remember, my book is available. New book is coming.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a link. Look here.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Let me talk a little bit with Elle about horror and you guys out there while we're waiting for our friend Dave from UK, who is kind of stuck in the tunnel. We will see. He will hopefully will join us.
He's
in a minute
stuck in
or
the
two.
Matrix right now, apparently.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? Maybe the devil got him. Who knows?
Oh yeah, but I love today, man. You're gonna talk some horror comics, and let me just show something real quick, folks. This is something when I was a kid. When he said horror comics, right up my alley. This is one of the only ones I got to salvage as a kid. Is my Chamber of Chills. You know, I love this. And there's companies now, such as Asylum Press by Frank Forte, that's actually reprinting pre-code books. Now, these are gorgeous right here, glossy paperwork. But then Source Point Press is doing this pulp joint too on kind of the original paper. So it looks gorgeous. Check them out, yo. Because again, this is what we're going to be talking about. But just trying to show you that these are things that are accessible to you. The things that we talk about here, you can find it from your favorite independent publisher.
Yeah, sort of, no offense to red-headed people, but horror is sort of the red-headed stepchild of the literary genre. Comes back every 10 years. And the moment we are in a sort of horror renaissance again, thanks to Blumhouse and the friends over there. And Halloween doing gangbusters again. Scream didn't do
you like Blumhouse? Do you like them?
Yeah, you have to hand it to Jason Blumhouse. He knows how to make cheap movies that are moderate to big successes. I mean, it's a great model. Roger Corman did the same thing. He said here's a young filmmaker, give him 1 million, make your movie. That's a great concept. And if you're an independent creator like myself, that's a great opportunity. I mean, I can write my books in my own privacy, but if you're a filmmaker, there's a guy coming and say, you can make your movie. Great, that's fantastic. I mean, it's if you go to the big studios, from what I understand, it's all sequels, prequels, whatever have you not. If you have a young independent director who wants to come across with a new idea, wants to join, why not? Give the guy a chance. I'm all for it.
Yeah, man, love it. Love it. So let's get into this journey of horror. And look at this beautiful classic cover.
Okay, just to give you a little bit intro here. We are currently, this is from 1935. We are in the early phase of the written fictional. I mean, there's stuff before that. There's Dracula, there's Frankenstein, but the pulps really honed in on this horror trend in the early 30s. It's the era of the Depression. It's Frankenstein, the first movie. The second movie comes out a little bit later, but the first movie, Dracula, is a little bit earlier, 1930. They all do gangbusters at the box office. People are, can you really put horror in movies without humor? Yes, you can. Dracula is a huge success, makes Bela Lugosi a star for a moment. Then comes Frankenstein. James Whale hits it out of the park with that one. So the pulps, cheap entertainment for 10 cents. It's the era of the Depression. People are looking for thrills. We have in England, we have the Penny Dreadfuls. In America, now we have the pulp magazines. And all the covers we will see, there's a little story to them. I want to tell you, because what we do now today is we talk about the origin of horror comics as a genre, and we will end at the beginning of the comics today. And next week, in 2 weeks' time, we will do part 2 when we talk about the time after the Comics Code. It's just so much good material here.
Pre-code talk. Oh my God! And I just showed you some pre-code stuff, folks, that you can get. So that's because again, my Chamber of Chills is actually post-code. So this is the conversation.
That's post-code. That's from the 70s. Then when horror made a big comeback. So in 2 weeks' time, we will talk about, if you're looking for these Warren magazines, if you want to hear about those. Tune in 2 weeks' time. We will talk in greater detail about those. But you can also, a lot of the stuff you hear from me today, you can see on the wonderful Comic Crusaders website. If you go on Comic Book Confidential, my column, I wrote a 12-part column series about EC Comics. So you can ask me probably everything about EC Comics. I don't know, but a lot of stuff. And I wrote also a 5-part series about the great, fantastic horror magazines from the 70s, the black and white magazines Marvel Warren put out, Skyward put out. We will talk about those in 2 weeks' time, when hopefully we were joined by Dave and our new compatriot, Dr. G, who has taken ill and will not be joining us today.
Get better, Dr. G.
Exactly. Dr. G, all the best. So the covers we are looking at here now for the next 3 or 4 covers, they're all by the same artist because I wanted to keep it limited to show a theme. The artist is John Newton Howard, who was the son of a minister.
But these are the novels, right?
These are 60, 70, 80 page novels or collections of short stories. They're shorter novels. You see a bunch of writers here, so they're usually 80, 90 pages. Novellas, we would call them.
Yeah. I have not seen covers like this in so long. I mean, why don't they do like this now? I mean, gorgeous.
Yeah, it's great stuff. I mean,
Jesus.
It's great stuff. He's considered one of the best pulp horror artists. And if we'll talk about Graham Ingalls in greater detail, he's considered maybe the best horror comic book artist. He certainly had a huge influence on Bernie Wright's, and many people consider the best, but Ingalls was earlier. And if you see this guy here, he's sort of the king of the horror pulps. And what's so interesting here now, if you look at the faces of these women, there's a little story to be had here, which is actually a very sad story. But just stay on the picture. Stay on one of these pictures. I'll tell you a little story. There was a guy named Robert George Irvin. Okay. He was a sculptor. He was an artist. And he was also the son of a minister. There seems to be something in the water. And he wanted to be an artist. He was a sculptor, he had talent. And he was not feeling right in his head. And so he checked himself into a clinic in New York, where he met a psychiatrist and said, "Oh, you have all these weird thoughts. We better keep you here for a while and see that you land on your feet again." And then after a year, the clinic said, "No, we need to kick this guy out. He has no money. We can't treat him here for free. Let's kick him out." And the psychiatrist said, "No, don't kick him out. We want to keep him here. He wants to stay here. He's in a safe environment." And the clinic said, "No, he needs to be out on the street." And out on the street, the artist went, the sculptor, and he took a board with a nice lady who had 2 sisters. And he happened to fall in love with the younger sister, who was not interested in him. The oldest sister was a model, and what she did model for was pulp magazines. She was one of the most famous pulp magazine models at the time. And she was really popular, and they found a lot of pictures she had modeled for these pulp magazines. So the chance is very high when you look at these pictures that they were modeled, that you had used Veronica Gedeon as his model.
Okay.
Going back to the sculpture, after the other sister had rejected him, he was invited for Thanksgiving, where he killed the model sister, the mother, and a waiter.
What?
And now comes the kicker. The psychiatrist who wanted to keep him in the New York clinic was Dr. Frederick Ruthven.
Get the fuck out of here.
It was one of his first residencies as a young psychiatrist. And he said, "No, we need to keep this guy behind. He wants to stay here. He's not right in the head." And this is the beginning of the pulp magazines. This is the beginning where Dr. Frederick Ruthven is confronted with this stuff for the first time. And he says, "Look at this shit." It goes back to the 1930s.
Wow, mind-blowing.
And the media, as you can imagine, they ran with the story, model sister murdered, pulp magazine girl killed. That was the story. And Dr. Ruthven saw this.
Oh, and look at nippleless ladies.
Mm-hmm. Well, what happened afterwards, we are still in the 1930s, mid-30s, censorship struck already then, because these magazines, you could sell them over the counter. And this didn't sit right with certain politicians looking for a platform. It's always the same story. These magazines make you bad. And so they could only be sold in brown paperbacks in certain states. They had to be sold under the counter. and slowly they faded away because people were a little bit embarrassed. I mean, it was like buying Playboy Image and you say, "Oh, do you have the latest edition of horror stories?" And I mean, at a certain point, and if you were like 12 or 11 or whatever, you thought this is the coolest thing ever. You didn't get those anymore so easily. Or if your father found those, I mean, this is. And as we will look at horror covers, and then we will eventually talk about the elephant in the room, EC Comics, and why EC Comics is so long-lasting. You see a lot of these covers, you will find them again in the comic book covers. Not as good as this, because these guys really got top money for painting these covers.
Yeah.
But you see a lot of this imagery repeated in the comic books later on. Now, let's talk a little bit about our favorite big two companies, Marvel and DC. This is DC Comics here. This is the origin of DC Comics.
The novels?
Harry Donenfeld owned. He was basically Harry Donenfeld, the founder of DC Comics, or what eventually became DC Comics. He was an immigrant, and with his wife, he opened a clothes store in New York, which failed, and his brothers had a printing business. And Donenfeld sort of stole this business from his siblings, and then he said, "I need content," and he created a pulp company and a distribution company, and pulps were the thing. At the same time, Martin Goodman, who would found Marvel Comics eventually, he also was in the pulp business. He was friends with the co-founder of Archie. Get this. And they had a business together originally. So the founder of Marvel Comics and the co-founder of Archie Comics, they were friends. And they ran a pulp business. Martin said, "Oh, I want these pornographic covers." And as you can imagine, the co-founder of Archie said, "No, we want something more wholesome." And so they separated. But Martin ran with this stuff. And so did Harry Donenfeld. And from these two guys, we have Marvel DC Comics eventually. Wow. It goes all back to the pulps.
Insane. Look at this. Look at this. Whoa, this is fucked up too, boy. Look at that cover.
Yeah, that's all John. It's all the same artists. Get this. I mean, this is all John Newton Howard.
Amazing. And the stories are all George Edson. I mean, this guy's all over the place.
There's a lot of stuff in there. I mean, you get for 15 cents you get stuff here. That's great. And you get the cover needs to sell the book. I mean, it's maybe a few of those writers.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a lot of guys who are still very revered. Robert Bloch, Ray Bradbury. They all started in the pulps in the 1940s, a little bit later than this, but they all started in the pulp magazines. But at this time, I mean, you had few names who were probably familiar to readers, but A. Merritt was quite popular, but and Otto Binder wrote for the pulp magazines.
Priestess of Pestilence. I love that name right there.
Yeah. A man who loved a zombie. Zombies were always popular.
Oh, what's this?
Okay. We're getting into comics now. The year is 1947, and some interesting things. It's 47, 48. Some interesting things happen. Yeah, I got this actually backwards. I will tell you why, because this is one of the longest running horror comics that started in the 1940s. This is not really 100% horror. It's a mystery thing, but you see this also. I shared a picture on Twitter today from a girl in bondage, and this was from 1946. It had horror elements to it. They began to emulate the horror elements, but if you go back to the 1940s, late 1940s, the big selling books were crime comics, Crime Doesn't Pay, Leif Gleason, and romance comics, created by Kirby and Simon and Kirby. These were the big sellers. And slowly from the crime comics, this idea of mysterious crimes, of horror began to seep into the zeitgeist, into these books. But it wasn't really there at this point. Adventures into Unknown ran 100 issues, if not more. And it was a mix of very slight horror with mysterious elements. It was not really a horror book, but it went into that direction. And we have a next cover. It's also from the same. You can get this idea. It's very mysterious. We have a mystery element to it. It goes in this direction.
I'll be right back.
No problem. I keep telling you about this. So this is the origin. This is the origin of mysterious horror and so on. And I already mentioned the big elephant in the room, EC Comics. Most people associate EC Comics with Tales from the Crypt, from the TV series, or they read EC Comics. EC Comics became or was an offshoot of American publishing. The founder of EC Comics.
Ooh.
Go a little bit back because I will tell you a different story about this one. The founder of EC Comics, which was originally called Educational Comics, was Max Gaines. Max Gaines is one of the fathers of the modern comic book. He was also a total dick, and he was a co-founder of one of the companies that eventually merged into DC Comics. In the late 1940s, he and Harry Donenfeld, the big boss of DC, they sort of had a disagreement, or in any case, Harry said, here's a suitcase full of money, give me your shares in the company. And to put this into perspective, Max Gaines, in his part of what eventually became DC Comics, American National, he had the Flash, the original Flash, he had Wonder Woman, he had all these big superhero characters. So Max sold those to put out Bible comics. Which were not a big success. Max then was convinced to start a line of crime comics, Crime Patrol and so on, and he began hiring new artists. And the very, very well-known artist Sheldon Moldoff, Batman artist Sheldon Moldoff, was working for him. He was his top artist. And Max Gaines died at the end of the 1940s in a boating accident. Oh. And his son, William Gaines, took over the company reluctantly, but his mother convinced him. The company was more or less bankrupt at this point. Yeah. And he was continued with those crime comics. And Sheldon Moldoff, seeing this Adventures into the Unknown, said, Bill, let's do a comic dedicated to horror comics. And Bill said, that's not going to sell. But I give you a little bit of money. You are the editor of this book. Put together a pilot. And Sheldon Moldoff did this. He put together a pilot horror comic. And even Graham Ingalls was in it. He was already working for the company at that time. And Bill Gaines looked at this and said, I don't like it. Let's put it in the drawer. This is where we are at this point. Go to the next slide. This happens. Avon Comics puts out a one-shot. This was originally only a one-shot.
Can I ask you though, is this Avon like Avon Products or something?
No. Avon was a publisher of pulp magazines, later also paperbacks. Okay. Avon, if you're a horror fan, you know Avon published Ray Bradbury. They published all these great names. They had paperbacks. Okay. And this is a comic. Now this is interesting. This came out in 1947, and it stayed a one-shot. Eventually, if you continue, we'll see the name Eerie again and again. Yeah. They revived the title a few years back, but when this came out in 1947, it was immediately stopped in its tracks. And do you want to know why? Because at this time, Elizabeth Short was murdered, the Black Dahlia. The werewolf killings, and she was not the only woman who was murdered in Los Angeles under very mysterious circumstances. The so-called werewolf killings, which also make it into my new book, out in the summer. The so-called werewolf killings happened in this time. Several women were brutally murdered.
So here's this cover of a man killing a beautiful woman that looks like an actress. Exactly. Now you're doing too much, too realistic.
Exactly. And that was where we said, okay, the market is not ready for this. We have this in the newspapers every day. Kids want entertainment. They don't want gruesome reality, because at this point it was no longer a fairy tale. At this point it was reality. And it seeped into the zeitgeist. And people were saying, well, basically, that's not the right time to do this. Let's do and I mentioned crime comics. Crime comics were always, crime doesn't pay. At the end, the gangsters were punished. You were never victorious as a gangster. Now, if you have a horror book, the monster gets the girl in the end, or there's a final girl, but there's some killing. This is very realistic stuff, and they kept it under wraps. They said, no, we are not going to continue with this. This is what we stand. And now, EC Comics, at the other hand, if you go to the next slide, they had a problem because they were really not selling their books. Enter an artist named Al Feldstein. Feldstein was originally a good girl artist. He did teen romance comics. This fell apart. He was working for EC Comics, which was still putting out crime comics. Feldstein went to Bill Gaines at the end of the 1940s and said, well, maybe we should try horror comics. And Bill said, yeah, that's a great idea. He had completely forgotten about Sheldon Moldoff's pitch, allegedly, because Sheldon Moldoff eventually wanted to sue Bill Gaines, but then he didn't. But Bill said, oh, horror comics, that's a great idea. I've never heard this before. And so they started to put in 2 horror stories into Crime Patrol and their crime comics. And these horror stories were so immensely popular, they converted one of these crime books into what was called the Crypt of Terror. If you say, okay, what was it's not Tales from the Crypt. No, they renamed it Tales from the Crypt after the 3rd issue.
Ah, okay.
So originally, and this is why this is the first issue, why it says number 17, because there's also a story why they renamed existing titles, because they didn't have to reply for second-class mailing privileges again and again, because there was a fee. So they simply renamed their books and said, oh, this is the same book, but there's a different name.
Yeah, but now you're messing with me, because you were talking about the werewolf killings, whatever. Look at that cover. What does it say right there in that newspaper?
Exactly. This is going back to that exactly, isn't it? It's very interesting. So this is obviously by Johnny Craig. So Johnny Craig, Al Feldstein were the first really the guys. Johnny Craig was actually hired by Max Gaines. These were really the first EC guys who really said, okay, let's do this. And Al Feldstein moved from being an artist into becoming the main writer in the first couple of years. This was immediately a hit. So EC was onto something all of a sudden.
Oh,
obviously continued with this.
Look at those covers, man. Sick, no?
Mm-hmm.
That's sick stuff,
Johnny Craig. I mean, if you go to the first couple of issues of Tales from the this is now Tales from the Crypt. If you go to these first, everything is already there. You have the crime milieu, you have the dead returning from the graves. You have always there's a certain morality to it, but there's also a certain brand of humor to it. The first couple of stories, if you go to Tales from the Crypt, they show you promise, but it's not really where you say this is so different from what everybody else was doing. We go to what everybody else was doing in a minute. Let's look at where this was going. You see the covers are improving. This is Jack Davis now. The covers are improving.
Yes,
you see that the whole package is getting better. It's getting slicker. Marie Severin needs a big shout out because she was the colorist on these books.
Oh,
and
that's
she did
exactly what stands out. It's that color. It makes it pop.
Mm-hmm. And if we're talking about EC Comics in great detail, but at this point, hey Dave is joining us. Excellent.
Sorry guys, I completely was engrossed in doing inking a page, and
yeah, I had this. I was also running a little bit late because I was still writing and said, "Oh, well, I'm the last one again." No, but Dave is even later.
Yes, I beat you.
Yeah, no problem here. No, but just giving a little bit intro here into just before we go into greater detail talking about EC Comics, but just at this point, this is 52, 53, and just looking at this page, the colors by Mary Severin, art by George Evans. You see why EC was top notch, and then there's the writing. Al Feldstein was really rocking it out of the park. They got other writers to join them, Otto Binder. There were other writers joining later, excellent writers. You see this is a top-notch product. EC Comics really stood above everybody else. This art is so groundbreaking. George Evans is one of the most forgotten artists in comic doom, which is a shame. He was just a clean line, looks so good. His artwork looks so good. Go to the next page. You see also how Mary Severin works here with the colors. This is so great.
See, this is the beauty of like comics from that period. It's like when you compare comics from yesterday to today, it's like it benefited from having the limited technology, the lower quality paper. Comics actually benefited from that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The impact. I mean, look at the coloring on that. So dynamic, yet, and it would be airbrushed out of existence today.
Yeah, man.
Yes. This is such a great. And look, this is still the same story. This is how the story is also told through the colors.
Oh yeah, the dark moments, of course, being as dark and putting you in that eerie mood immediately.
I mean, it's a very basic story. He's killing. These are two Navy divers, and they're in love with the same woman. One guy said, "Okay, I go for another girl, but it doesn't work out. He wants this one girl, and there's also some money. And in the end, he murders his best friend. And it's an amazing story. Al Fershon was really a great writer, also. If you go, and this is once again, green is the theme with Mary Summer. If there's something in green, if you go through EC Comics, you see where people would normally put red as a danger sign. She put green because she wanted to diffuse these brutal images slightly. But so if you're a reader of EC Comics, when panel turns green, this is where the gruesome stuff is happening.
Right.
Gotcha.
Well, I mean, you can only use so much red.
I love covers like this. Look at this shit. This is what happens in rush hour in New York. If you're standing by the door, you better let go.
There's room for one more. Yeah. So I mean, this is really the problem. Really, what we see implemented in this cover is EC was also under a little bit of pressure because they really ran with the horror trend in the 50s, 51. They really began to become a unit with their new artists. We talk about this in great detail. I have great art prepared. But the competition, everybody wanted in on the horror trend. We also see how this changed other comic publishers, DC, Marvel at that time. Everybody wanted in on the horror trend. And as it always is, it's like a sequel. It's the third part, the fourth part. You have to really up the scales. You have to be more gruesome.
It's killing me. Was that an intended pun? Everybody wanted to be in the horror train, and here we are.
Yeah.
Well, isn't that true with everything, though?
Yeah.
It's whatever's.
Ooh.
Yeah, Eerie is coming back. Yeah, I think I know what Dave wants to say. I mean, it's if there's more and more coming into the market, you really need to fight to stand out.
Yeah, I mean, or people are just fighting to get in. Every time a genre isn't created overnight. It's not. Someone creates a title that does well. They need a second one, a third title. Everyone's going like, "Wow, that title! What is it about that title? What genre is that title? Let's all jump on."
Yeah.
And then, of course, it becomes push. And then, if you don't have the quality of artists, the next thing becomes, well, what can we do to beat them? They've got the best artists. They've got the best writers. Well, then we've got to beat them on the shock value.
Yeah, and then that's and suddenly something happens here. If you go to the next page, Wally Wood bursts onto the scene.
Yeah,
and there's Bill. And says, "We have one happy family. Come on over to EC Comics." And Bill was getting all the best artists. He was paying them better. He created the sense of a bullpen. He had a great line with the fans. They were writing these columns. They were talking to the fans directly. A lot of things Stan Lee later took on for Marvel. EC Comics developed this. Oh, there's Gracie. Hey. Hello, be us welcome.
Let's just welcome our little guest from Comic Crusaders here, which is an extreme horror fan that when he saw Chris's comments on social, Bracy said, "Oh God, I need to." And I know that Bracy always loves these opportunities. So I said, Bracy, join us as we discuss things because we definitely love your insight.
Sorry I missed so much of this. My you guys don't know, my wife has recently come home from the hospital. Had a procedure, and I've been taking care of her. So, I'm a little scatterbrained of late.
Gotcha. But is he allowing you to
talk about horror stories?
Yeah, we are. Welcome. I've never seen you face to face, man. We communicate on Twitter.
It's good to actually see and hear you, Chris.
There we go.
Yeah, thanks. Same.
Look at that Crusader family love. Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, that's what we do here.
Let's get it.
Big family. Get a little bit more sound here. So this is Wally Wood, who is really becoming a name for himself. He's just back from the Marine. I had this unfortunate discussion with somebody on Twitter the other day who said, "Oh, these guys never served in the army." Shut up. These guys served. Wally Wood was in the Navy. Yeah, Wally Wood was in the Navy when he was 17. He just came back after the war, after his stint, and he was working with Harry Harrison, and he was shopping his stuff around. He's with Avon now, and you see a couple of stories. And if you go through the Avon horror stories, Vallywood stands out. I mean, Vallywood is the man. He rocks everything. And Bill Gaines said to him and Harry, "Come on over to EC Comics." It didn't work out for Harry at EC Comics, so he became a famous science fiction writer. But Valley and all the gang, they all hung out at EC Comics. There was a club mentality. A family mentality.
Is that Oscar the Grouch when he before the garbage?
Well,
I'm not even sure Valley drew the monster.
I actually have to comment on that. I find that particular person's argument to be a fallacious argument because part of the wonder of being a writer or a creator of any sort is you don't have to necessarily have that lived experience. You can just be a thorough researcher. You go out and talk to the people who have done it. Otherwise, we would have no imagination, no media, no literature, nothing like that to speak of, because you can't go out and live every single thing you want to write about.
I mean, there's something very interesting to your point. I mentioned it in one of my columns, because Harvey Kurtzman is very famous for starting the war line or the anti-war comics at EC Comics. And he had never really been outside of the United States. He was also enlisted, but he never really left the United States. And then he had Vallywood to draw for him. And Valley said, "Oh, I had all these great stories. I was in the Navy." And he said, No, I don't want to hear those. I know how the story needs to go. I know how you only need to draw it. You don't need to tell me your experiences. I already know. And Harvey and Valley did great stuff, but he was not interested in Valley's stories. Right. Because he had a unique vision of the war.
No, and that makes sense. Being an artist myself, like if I'm not co-creating a story with somebody, your role as an artist is to it's great if you have a collaborative setting, but your role as an artist is to bring somebody else's vision to life if you're working for somebody in that context. So good on him for being able to do that.
Yeah, well, actually, think about it another way. What Wally could still do is, having lived it, having been there, just the eye of detail when you decorate, you become set decorator. You're going like, okay, well, yeah, I'm going to follow your story, but I'm going to make sure this gun's right. I'm going to make sure
his visual storytelling perspective is going to be unique in that respect.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think Harvey was great in plotting the layouts also for his artists, and he gave them more freedom than Al Feldstein. But I think if you go to the horror, these military comics, you see really Valley brings so much emotion to the faces of the soldiers who have been in the war, and that's something that Valley would really brought to this, and it's really unique. But we will talk about those at some other time. We will talk more about Vallywood in detail. But here we see now everybody's jumping in. This is Charlton, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and I love the font on this with the art in it. I mean, so marvelous now, like the cinematic universe, right, where they put the imagery inside the lettering.
I love the absolute just a wonderful composition of this particular cover, and just how much detail is in here. And I lament a lot of modern covers, which are nothing more than pinups. It feels like when you went through that era of movies in the early 2000s or so, when everything was just headshots, how boring was that? Like, this is exciting. This makes me want to open up a book and see what's inside.
And now just wait for it. One of the other guys, Ditko, comes on the scene. Ditko is here.
Oh my God, gorgeous! Look at this. So much action going on in this scene.
And this is we're still in the early 50s. Ditko is already here. He's working for Avon. He's working for Charlton. He's working all over the place, and he's really a brand new talent. And if you're a kid, if you have any sense of artistic flair, you say, "Wow, who's that guy?" I mean, this is just amazing.
Oh, I would have eaten this shit off the racks if I would have seen it. What?
Yeah,
eat it off the racks if it was done now.
Absolutely.
Even look at this. Oh shit! Yo, look at this.
Now there's a literal headshot cover.
But do you know the artist? This is Don Heck.
Heck.
Wow, Don Heck, nice.
This is Don Heck, who was an absolute. He wasn't really not a superstar, but he was a well-respected artist at this time. He did excellent romance comics. And he was there for the horror comics.
I do notice something here, though. I noticed something very particular, because while the lettering has red, How come the whole doesn't?
Yeah, that was the step too far, obviously.
Because that's blood. You see, that's actual blood on a body.
So you
Yeah,
can't
it's
do
like
that.
I remember like reading comics as a young person, not understanding the whole Comics Code authority at the time because I didn't know the history. You know, I was just
But this is
reading comics.
pre-code.
And and I remember like I noticed it first in Conan because Conan would slash people with the sword, and there'd be this black blood was always flying because the artist could only use ink; they couldn't color it red. And I kept thinking like, that was weird.
I mean, Conan was very interesting. We said we do this as a two-parter. Next week we talk about the 70s revival of horror. And Conan the Barbarian. I mean, Elle is a big Conan fan, the biggest on the planet. A super stan was really came about when the code began to relax. This is the time 71, 72 when Conan came out. The code began to relax. So yeah, also, I mean, the magazines were not affected by the code. If you were asking that question, but there was topless nudity. Okay, the magazines were different. We talk about the magazines next week. But the comic books, also the code began to relax, and so you could do Conan in comic books.
I was gonna ask you about that because I was also reading like the horror magazines in the 70s, and I figured they got away with it because it was black and white. Because they were
that was not that was not the reason. That was not the reason. It actually goes back to Jim Warren, who really came up with this, because he said it's in the magazine space, it's not in the racks, so kids cannot get to them. So they're not affected by the code, and they tried it and they couldn't get away with it. Everybody was doing it. So they were next to the Playboys. So basically, okay, this is for adults.
Diary of Horror, I'm in love. I want this. And is that Harley Quinn?
Yeah, that's Harley Quinn. That's the first appearance. It's canon. You heard it here first. So this issue is going to explode on eBay tonight.
Right? That looks like Harley. Look at that.
It's very Harley.
And what's up, man? That's Crossbones.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here.
That's what I look like in the morning when I wake up with my hair one way, my beard the other.
I suppose that's the Wizard Shazam on the other side, then.
Yeah, that's the sort of thing we got here. Yeah, wonderful. So, but what we also see in a minute is how the other publishers reacted. I mean, these are mostly one of them. This is fiction. This is Fiction House. So what the pulp publishers were doing, we talked about the pulp publishers earlier. They began to develop their own comic book lines. We heard this from DC, we heard this from Marvel, but also Fiction House. This is Fiction House, the #1 pulp publisher. They began to develop their own comic book lines. And this is where we see guys who couldn't really hack it as pulp cover artists like Graham Ingels. He did one pulp cover, which is not very good, but they could work in comics. And they could do great covers, and they could do great interiors. So this is also where Graham Ingels begins to start.
I can see the transition because he's actually painting his cover, which is something you didn't see in comics a lot at the time, unless they were the magazine racks.
You see it if you go one further. You really see the connection to the pulp magazines. If you see, this is a very pulp cover.
Oh man, that looks like that actor. What's his name?
Peter Lorre.
No.
Isn't it Peter Lorre?
He kind of looks like Christopher Lee's Frankenstein portrayal to me.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's a little generic, really, actually. Doesn't it?
And this cover definitely has like that kind of a cinematic movie poster feel from the time.
Yeah.
In the 40s.
Yeah, that's Morris Whitman. He did a lot of covers for Fiction House for this series. Next one as well. If you look at the next one, which I really, really like. The next one is really good.
Ooh, that's really nice. Yes, it is. That is really nice.
That's a busy cover, but he makes it work.
Well, the color makes it work, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's very, very well grounded. You have these different segments.
Yeah.
This is Lee Elias, great artist.
Talk about give me some tongue, baby. Look at that.
True romance.
Oh, man.
True romance.
I bet that was so shocking in the day. Like I can imagine this cover just making people stand there.
But it was also the flew off the shelves, flew off the racks.
I'm pretty sure she went vegan after that.
And we stopped at the time EC was really coming into his own 51, 52. Hang on a second. I want to talk about this in a minute. But In 1952 was the biggest year for comics ever. 2.5 billion comics were sold in this year alone. Boys and girls were reading comic books like never before.
Yeah,
what changed was the baby boomer generation, because you had all these kids now all of a sudden. 52, they are 7 years old, 8 years old. These post-war babies, and there was a huge market. There was no television at that time. Radio was big, sure. Television was slowly coming in, and this was really the pinnacle of comic books. Has never been met, not even in the 90s. This is really a big boom, and they all want these horror books because they're forbidden. And they sense that the nuclear family is not working. There's something very wrong. And DC will really, really hark on this trend, that the nuclear family is not working. Because Al Ferdinand really hated the idea of the nuclear family. I mean, he was a family man, married to two daughters. He would eventually marry 3 or 4 times, if I'm not mistaken. So something was really not working in this setup. And this really reflects this, but DC Comics did it a little bit better. So if you go to the next one, this is our friends at Marvel Comics. This is Marvel, this is Atlas. Atlas was really, really cranking it out at that time. Martin Goodman had founded Atlas, and to this day people often think, so Atlas was a comic book company. Atlas was not a comic book company. What you had on those comic books were the names of the distributor. If you go to the DC Comics, they all have E&D, Independent News, because DC's sister company was the distributor. Atlas was Martin Goodman's self-publishing enterprise. He was distributing the books himself. Because there was so much product they could ship, they went from, I believe, 24 titles in 1 year to 75 titles a month in the year later.
You hear this?
They were really shipping this stuff out like you wouldn't believe it.
Holy cow.
That's not like DC.
Mm-hmm.
Now, though, pushing $100 a month, no one could afford to buy it right now, though.
Yeah, but
this is.
Oh, look at this, yo! I married a zombie. Of course you did. You always attracted to the sickos.
Yeah,
I love that titling too, because once again that goes back to the old classic Silver Age movies that I grew up on. Like, as you know, I married a Martian. I was a teenage werewolf.
Yeah,
so I love them.
It's all the same.
Tapping into that past.
I was a comic book creator.
Yeah. I was a writer. Who was a legal
podcaster.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. I was a podcaster. That's the next horror movie starring Al Murray.
And if you don't forget it, Al has a banner there, encouraging to buy my horror book.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, look there, look here. There's my horror book. Just buy it.
Just in case you forget, that's what it looks like. All right.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a great looking cover.
Yes, Dave helped create this. And we're working on the new cover right now. And if I'm not mistaken, Bracy bought my book, didn't you? I think you did. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your purchase. Dave did too.
What on that part of the package to get him? You know, if he buys the book, he could be on the show. All right, no.
Forgive me, I haven't gotten around to reading it yet.
No worries. I haven't finished the second book yet. I'm still working on the second book.
But look at this cover. The vampire takes a wife. But I mean, that's not a vampire. That's a werewolf.
The same comment.
You know what I'm saying?
But look at the humor. Just married. I mean, this is on the car. Isn't that great? I mean, this is so wonderful. And isn't that a precursor to Werewolf at Night? I mean, if you go to the 70s, you already see Marvel. It's going there a little bit.
It's. I love the composition on this too. It's well framed. I love the idea of using the moon to like really create that spotlight to focus on the main action, and then the surrounding elements just contribute to everything as well. And like you said, the humor of having the just married is like the cherry on top.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's just perfect.
But I just love the verb. It takes a wife, like literally, homie, you're done. I'm taking your wife.
And at this moment, you wonder what happened to Stan Lee. What was with this nice little guy there, Stan Lee? What's with him? There's something happening here, because they tried to bring the superheroes back in the 70s. You have the Black Cat. The Black Cat all of a sudden is no longer a superhero. It's a horror book.
And this is not the Black Cat, from Marvel. This is the OG Black Cat.
The original. This is Harvey Comics here. That's the original Black Cat. Quickly, she moves away from these nice little crimes to horror, and you see she's slowly getting pushed out of her own book. This is happening. The superheroes who made a tiny comeback in 47, thanks to Stan Lee, said, "Oh, I want to try the superheroes." they begin to fade once more because the horror trend is everywhere. If you go to the next one, you see it even more pronounced. This is really where this is going. And if you go to the next one, because this
wait, before we go to the next one, in this instance, doesn't she look very early Black Canary?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I see.
But actually, Black
Canary. I fucking love this.
Yeah. And this is still the same magazine, but the Black Cat, for the next 20, 30 issues, she's not in the book anymore.
Isn't that what they used to call Bracy White Heat?
Mm-hmm.
Still do.
Hey!
That's amazing. So if you go to this is a very famous cover of the Spirit, obviously for various reasons. But if you go to the next one, you see what happens to the superheroes.
Wait. I don't even want to move on from this yet. Who is the colorist on this? Because this is.
I have no idea. This is lost to time. The colorist is lost to time. Because it's very difficult. Mary Severin is well known as the colorist of EC Comics, but a lot of these colorists nobody knows who colored these books.
They just didn't get the credit they were.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No.
And there would have been just so many. There would have been so many.
Check this out. So they're trying. So this is when they're trying to bypass some horror and get into more action.
They brought it back eventually for 3 issues before they canceled the book. They said, okay, let's bring the heroine back for one.
Hey, bro, she's going to be holding on to that thing. Look how it fires off.
Yeah. And they even made it a little bit more horror-ish on the next cover because they gave her black hair.
Ooh. There you go. Hey Al, last cover, the first appearance of Firefly.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. But look at this. This is like a Puerto Rican that way. He got the little goatee going on. Then it has it shaved in a day or two. What's going on, bro?
Yeah.
It's Al Mustapheles.
Mega Fisto.
They should have given him a switchblade, no?
Would these issues have been all new material? Would there have been?
No. This is reprint. This was a special deal, as you can see here. This is a special reprint deal. They had to, and they were also oversized. I think that was a special giveaway. These are very rare. If you come across these issues,
really, I will get it. Thank you, bro. Listen, I'm gonna start skipping away from the standard superhero when I go to cons. Like if I could see shit like this, I think this is actually I'm gonna go start picking up. This is what really attracted me as a young man. As a young little boy in shops, it was horror comics, GI Joes. It was Howling Commandos, all that shit.
Oh, funny you should say that. Go to the next slide, please, and you see exactly what's happening here now. Captain America is literally drowning because Captain America is drowning in his own book because by the next issue he will be out of the book. Because Captain America is selling comic books because horror is, and Captain America goes away because horror is the big thing. There is no superheroes anymore.
What a big statement! The outcast of time. You suck, homie.
There's still this wonderful. You see, Captain America's gone. It's still Captain America. It's the next issue. There's still this idea that after the war, people lost interest in superheroes. It's not really true, but the horror trend became so omnipresent that everything else was
strange. It's so strange to see Captain America's Weird Tales. Why not just rebrand it as Weird Tales?
Well, actually, one of the main reasons for that is you've got the space on the rack. So it would just follow on from that. If you took that off, you might have it's almost like you've got that book on for a certain price at a certain time. And so it's there. If you want to get a new book on the rack, it would go up each year. So might be more expensive.
And also ride those coattails.
Yeah.
But it's also the other reason I mentioned earlier before you guys joined, because you had to register with the postal office for the second priority mail rebate you got every time you had a new title. So they kept these going. So they said this is basically the same book.
And let me just say that big motherfucker is definitely an ill-conformist if you could fit in that small box. Look how big that guy is.
Jeez. Come on, Al. You never saw a Creep Show? Thing under the
okay. And the same happens. The same happens now to romance books. This is already a very science fiction cover, but Venus was ostensibly a romance title for. That's gender here for a minute for girls, and apparently people loved Venus. and she made a comeback in the Marvel Universe proper 10 years ago. But Venus basically became a horror book. If you go to the next one, if you go to look at this, Bill Everett made this wonderful cover, and this is Venus now as a horror book.
Wow.
Unbelievable. I did not know this little bit.
Brace's mind is blown right now.
It is.
So this is why I call Chris the professor.
Yeah. For real. What is the professor? This guy's, I'm going to call him the dean.
I'm somewhat aware of certain romance comics from way back in the day, but I didn't know that they also transitioned to horror. This is like so enlightening.
It's beautiful. That's what International Comic Crusaders does, man. It's deep dives into history.
Wait till the next cover.
These guys be finding
if you go to the next cover here, this is still the same.
That's great.
Isn't that wonderful? That's like a batch. That's like a bad date on was it Tinder? This Tinder date from hell. I should have posted that. I might post it still on Twitter.
Wasn't that movie I'm gonna get you, sucker? Where the girl says, "Hold on, let me show you the real me," and she starts taking off a wig, her teeth, a fake arm, a fake leg.
I don't really famous.
It's like a TikTok video.
The famous horror story.
I just love that he's got like a trio of or a whole closet full of ghouls sitting in the back. It's almost like they're sitting there going, wait, he's going to pull off the mask.
The swingers.
This will be great. This will be great. Okay, and once again, we go back to EC Comics to value the king on the heap.
But that cover was a Bill Everett cover, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was a Bill Everett cover. But this is here our man Jack Kamen, who really, what a lot of people don't know, if they look at Phantom Lady, they say, oh, that's all great Matt Baker art. Jack Kamen was the ghost of Matt Baker for a long time. So a lot of these wonderful Phantom Lady comic books will say, oh, this great art. That's not Matt Baker. It's actually Jack Kamen. And he came to EC Comics as well. And he is one of the most subversive artists ever, because he had all these beautiful looking people and they did horrible things.
It's like Bill's
faces, man. Damn.
Bill Finger drawing all these Bob Kane books, and Bob Kane's getting the credit.
Yes.
And he didn't just draw beautiful people, man. I mean, when they were gross, look at this guy.
Yeah, I mean, Kamen is one of my favorite artists, and his son Dean Kamen is the inventor of the Segway, of this mobile thingy.
Ooh. Wow, look at this.
And Jack Kamen was really great at this kind of stuff here. The noir, this is very Barbara Stanwyck here. This is the noir. This is the dark, twisted romance.
And look at that aqua blue going on. That shade, beautiful.
Great, it's so good. Jack Kamen is so good.
Hey,
and this is Jack Kamen in black and white to see the contrast. I mean, how good is Jack Kamen? I mean, completely forgotten these days, but every time I post something about Jack Kamen, say, well, one of the best artists who's totally forgotten, you say, who's Jack Kamen?
Look at the middle bottom panel and just the look of her. OMG.
Yeah, it's really nice to see it like this, because I like seeing it in the black and white here, because it also reminds me of something that we've lost in newspaper are the dramas, comics that used to be part of newspapers, not just all like funny stuff to make you laugh. There used to be some good superhero, some action, some fantasy, some drama things that you would get in your newspaper on a weekly schedule.
Yeah.
I think one of the things about EC Comics was that I always appreciated, and it wasn't just EC, but I think it's very telling in the EC Comics, is the fact that the page can work equally well in black and white. Like you look at that. If you go back and look at that page, it works perfectly in black and white. It's almost like why put color on it? And so many comics are drawn these days for color. That, like, if you just saw the back line, you wouldn't take a second look at it.
If I could speak to that as an artist, obviously, given my age, back when I started, I worked exclusively on paper, and so it was all pen and ink. And if I was going to do anything color myself, it would have to be watercolor or something like that, just because of what you're working on. You can't obscure the inks. But since I switched to digital several years back, my drawing style has changed, and I only draw like I used to if I'm requested to draw a solely black and white piece. then I start doing my feathering and my cross hatching and things like that. Because when I'm drawing something that I know that I'm going to have to color, I let the color fill in a lot of that detail that I used to do with line work.
Makes total sense. I mean, if you want to, these stories have all been reprinted. I mean, if you want to go back and buy those as reprints, I can really not recommend the Dark Horse archives, because they're really horribly recolored, remastered, really atrocious. But you can buy the black and whites from Fantagraphics. They're sorted by artists. Get those artist editions. They're very popular. They're excellent. They really put a lot of effort into remastering the black and white of the line work. They're not just taking out the colors. They don't do this. They do a perfect job with that. This, of course, is Hollywood. We get here Hollywood, and you get an idea how adult comics all of a sudden becomes. This is the story about an older guy who falls in love with an underage girl, and she really plays him for a fool. And this is a very, very famous story, but it's also, you see how advanced EC has become. This is 52, 53. It's really, they're knocking it really out of the park. There's a reason why these EC comic books have been reprinted, because they're still the best books.
Look at how full his backgrounds are. This is worthy of anything George Perez would do. So very detail oriented. And I've got to also add, just for folks who are artists and if you want to study things, a big part of my trade paperback collections are collecting things like the Marvel Essentials, which are reprints that are all in black and white. Newsprint, although the newsprint isn't the most important part. But I collect a lot of, Jack Kirby, John Romita, all these artists. If I can get an issue of their stuff in black and white, or sometimes even just their pencil worth, it's well worth it if you want to be an illustrator or an artist, because you get to really appreciate what they're doing. The color is great, obviously, but if you want to draw, you need to see those lines.
You see also here, this cover is very interesting, because it is a cover to a story by Al Williamson. The cover and the story couldn't be any more different, because Al Williamson has this very attractive, Alex Raymond influenced style, and his people are always very attractive. And look how ugly the guy is. Hollywood was really going there. He said, oh, this is the ugly men and the attractive women. This is really a gross story, really. And he brought the grossness of the story to the cover, which is not really so apparent when you read the story. The movie Passenger actually stole the story.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Al Williamson did the story inside, but that's what he did the cover.
And this is Al Williamson, inked by Frank Frazetta. Again.
Wait a minute, and was that Lucy?
No, this is Liz Taylor.
Inspired by her.
That's Liz Taylor, obviously. But there isn't the version of this story that exists that Bernie Krigstein inked, which looks very strange. Because Bernie Krigstein is one of the best EC artists, but he was not a good inker for Al Williamson.
Gotcha.
Well, Al Williamson and Frank Frazetta often work together. So what they would do is one would be penciling while the other one's they're both penciling at the same time, and then as they start inking, they swap pages back and forth. And
if there's an interesting thing, there's only one story Frank Frazetta did the art for EC Comics, which I talked at great lengths in one of my horror columns. And originally, Al Williamson was picked to draw this. And it's a very, very cynical story about a guy who murders his pregnant wife, a girlfriend. And it's really this take on, I want to be the roaming hero. I don't want to be stuck with a girl and a kid. So he murders her. And then he said, I'm not going to draw that. And Frazetta said, okay, I can do that for you, no problem. And that's how we got one story done by Frank Frazetta for EC Comics.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And this is, of course, one of my favorites, Joe Orlando.
Very nice. Very, very nice.
Who eventually became the president of DC Comics. He became the president of DC Comics and the co-publisher of Mad Magazine.
Again,
look at that.
And this is Joe Orlando doing one of my favorite stories based on the Ray Bradbury story, obviously, as it says here, because DC Comics also, they began to steal, quote-unquote, steal plots from Ray Bradbury stories. And you see the quality guy Ray Bradbury was. Today, they would come as lawyers and everything. He was just, he just said, oh, they stole my plots. And he sent them a letter and said, "Oh, I noticed you adapted 2 of my stories. That's great. I really love the stories. I'm sure you missed the money. The check got lost in the mail."
I'm sure you're probably aware that Harlan Ellison sued Marvel for stealing a story and won a lifetime of comic books off of that deal.
Wow.
Yeah, he also famously sued James Cameron, and he won, and which is very obvious because Cameron really stole from 2 of his Outer Limits episodes.
Yeah.
Somebody should have stole Alan Moore that when he stole from the Outer Limits. But anyway, so this is really Ray Bradbury said, "Please adopt as many stories of mine as you want. Send me the money, and everything's cool." And they did, and some of these stories are amazing. This art. I mean, this is one of the few stories that make me cry.
But I think
also once again Orlando.
But I think that eventually played in Ray Bradbury's favor in a much bigger way, because I think that through the comics, a lot of people got to know who Ray Bradbury was, saw out his books.
Yeah, it's the same time.
It's wonderful because like you get comics doing that. Like Star Trek introduced me to Harlan Ellison. You never know how one thing is going to lead you back to the original source.
Yeah, and the thing was, it's something that's continued even today. Like there's not a single comic book writer I know who doesn't get his, shall we say, inspiration from somewhere else.
Sure.
And be that whether it's a novel, short story, a newspaper article, Scientific America, anything like that. It's like you take that. Wow, I read that newspaper article and I read that magazine article, and like I remember seeing that film, and I'm just gonna.
Yeah, and like all the way back to myths and legends. We're just building on previous stories. Like I was telling Chris and Twitter's, like we're standing on the shoulders of giants, trying to create our own monoliths, and hoping that we will inspire people in the future.
Absolutely. And talking about standing on the shoulders of giants, I mean, everybody who's watching this knows Watchmen, the comic, and you know the story of the pirate comics in Watchmen. And if you heard the name Joe Orlando, Alan Moore created the idea that there were no superhero books because superheroes were real in the Watchmen universe. So they had these pirate comics, and they were all drawn by Joe Orlando. That was Alan Moore's tip to the head to Joe Orlando, saying, well, he would be the guy who would have drawn those pirate comics. And the irony is, EC Comics put out some pirate comics later after the Comic Code, but Joe Orlando never drew a pirate comic.
Right.
So funny.
This is so funny. I mean, this is also an amazing story here. This is EC is so good at this time. This is really 50. If you go to the golden period of EC Comics is really 52, 53, 54. I mean, this is just the art is so brilliant. And this is a take on the idea that basically these aliens use humans as cattle. And they have a Judas goat. This woman really says, "Oh, you must be in good spirits because the meat tastes better when you're in good spirits," which is absolutely true. And so they're lured into this trap, and they're all great spirits. Oh, we get this girl, we get food, and then they get slaughtered. I mean, it's so good.
Why not, man? You know, hey, bro, that's what they do to people on death row, right? Here's a good meal before you get fucking wrecked. So if you're gonna eat good, folks, you better step away.
You know, I can't help but be struck once again. Is like looking at the art in these comics and seeing how rich in detail they are, how impeccably structured the pages are, the panels. It's very easy to follow. And I was just at my local comic shop the other day, and the owner was lamenting like the new Thing series that was coming out. The art is just it's so baseline. It's nothing that would have gotten you a job at Marvel back in the 70s, 80s, or 90s when I was reading it mostly. And so it's just looking at the devolution of the number one comic book company, and I'm looking back at the past and seeing art that's head and shoulders above so many artists.
I mean, there's no offense to any current. You're an artist, and I'm not an artist, so I can't really speak about the artists. But what I can tell you is these guys, they started when they were 16, 17. They went to art school. The first they did when they landed their first jobs was to clean up the artwork. That was the first thing they did. Yeah. Eventually, they were allowed to ink, but after a year, they really learned the trade, and it shows. And this is an artist who's not often mentioned when you talk about the EC comic books. This is Reed Crandall. And Reed Crandall, if you go back to the early 1940s, he did all those Blackhawk comics. Blackhawks.
I love his
work. His work is so amazing, so outstanding. And there's this quote by Jim Steranko. He said basically there's two artists from the 1940s who really stood out to him all the time: Jack Kirby and Rick Crandall. I mean, if you, I mean, this is just, I mean, Rick Crandall is such a genius.
Well, I mean, Jim Warren certainly believed he was such, because he did a lot of work for Jim Warren.
Yeah, and it's too bad we've gotten away from the bullpen of working together in a space, because that just makes you better.
Energy, kinetic energy, psychomagnetism, like Jim Steranko talks about. You need this in this creative field.
It's not just that. Like, I know when I would go to the comic shop and I would start drawing my comics, and there's other comic hopefuls drawing their comics, and you sit there and you start looking at each other's work, and you're like, oh man, that's really good. Like, you keep setting the bar from each other. You keep learning from each other.
Yeah, but
that setting that happens. But like when everybody's working remotely, you know, each man is an island, and you're not getting the same thing. It takes an extra level of dedication to be really good now.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of that is down to, if you look at what's happened is, so even up until the 80s, it was late 80s, even early 90s, it was, even then you were starting to see the great exodus from places like New York of artists. They were no longer, they couldn't afford to live there anymore. The rates for drawing comics weren't keeping in touch with inflation. And I think that's what you see today is we've reached a point where you can't labor, you don't have the luxury of being able to put the effort that Rick Crandall in, because you're trying to finish as many pages as you can, because you're trying to draw 2 books a month, even just to pay the basics. So, you know, unless you're in a good royalty paying book, you're going to be trying to do as much as you can, go to conventions, sell your sketches, sell your artwork.
Who is the artist here? I mean, I know Dave knows. Do the other guys know who the artist is?
No,
Dave
I don't.
knows.
This style looks really familiar.
This is Graham Ingles. This is Graham Ingles. Graham Ingles worked for Fiction House, and he did the longest running science fiction series, Lost Planet, which is actually not is it Lost Planet? Lost World. Lost World, which is amazing.
We had a chain on Twitter once with this, didn't we?
Yes. It's just an amazing. I mean, you can read all of this stuff I'm telling you in my columns about EC Comics on Comic Crusaders. Go to Comic Book Confidential. This is all in my columns. This is very early Graham Ingles, who didn't really cut it as a pulp cover artist, as I said, but they liked him in Fiction House and said, "Oh, you're doing science fiction comics now. Would you like to draw this?" And this is really where you see very early Graham Ingles. And he was also a mentor for these guys. He mentored young Frank Frazetta. Graham Ingles mentored young Frank Frazetta.
Yeah,
and he was really like, "You are much better than me. But there's a few things I can teach you."
Yeah, go read Chris's columns. It's like Chris's columns on this subject are so in depth. I think you really ought to condense them and
no worries.
Book, because it's some really great reading.
You're talking Bracy, Chris. We're gonna collect this. Don't you worry.
Good.
It's gonna be a Comic Crusaders branded thing where we're gonna share this wonderful knowledge.
I would love to have these.
It is 101. To have this in print material is so necessary.
I would love to have this as a collection. This series of articles collected on my as a book on my shelf. I mean, it's that good.
Yeah, you guys. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And you will see my growth as an artist, so to speak, in my horror novels. And I tell you, the second novel, I learned so much writing my first novel. My second novel is really, we always say, wow. This is the first one. But going back here, this is Graham Ingles now in 54. This is 53. Wow. This is no. He's in. What we saw earlier was from the late 40s. This is 4 or 5 years later. This is the same growth we see here with Barry Windsor Smith, I would say. We see a very competent artist to finding his niche. Horror was really where he excelled.
We should say more like Bernie Wrightson. Because that's who, I mean, Ingles was Bernie's biggest influence.
Look at these interiors. Look at this.
I was about to say, the cover reminds me of Bernie, but it's not Bernie.
No, it's Bernie was influenced by Graham to large degree.
Oh man, I went to high school with a dude that looked like that on the third panel.
Yeah, but this is what I also wrote about. I said, I mean, basically, Graham Ingles was able to find the beauty in ugliness, and this is a wonderful romance story between, and you stay on this page because the next page is mind blowing. This is a vampire and a werewolf who have a love affair together. They have a child together.
Oh, Romeo and Juliet. Okay.
And what you see on the next page is the birth of the child. And if this is not one of the best, look at this. This is so well written. This is so well illustrated. And you see comics. There is no competition. This is so good.
Yeah, it is. You know, what was it about them making sure they're using different background color behind the fonts? What was that all about?
Well, you wanted to stand out for one thing, and your choices of color help create focus in an image. You know, it's like remember the panel you're talking about with all the aqua blue, the people at the pool.
Beautiful.
You know, the one woman figure, she's the only thing that has any actual cover, and everything else is blue because they want to narrow the focus on that potential figure. And so,
what is
set up in this top panel? It gives you the cool colors, establishes as night, but then we get back to the important figures. Boom, we get that splash of red right there. So you draw right to that.
But again, we talked earlier about the same as yellow. I'm sorry.
Hang on, but we talked earlier about where you asked me who was the colorist on, and I couldn't really say who was the colorist on an Avon book from the 1950s. But the interesting thing is here with EC Comics, and maybe this is also a testament to what a closely knit family this is. I can tell you who edited this book. Al Feldstein edited this book.
Al's asking why different text boxes have different colors in this particular
Yes. Yeah, that was the question. But Al asked me earlier.
Yeah, earlier I did as well.
Colored a cover, and I couldn't tell you. But I can tell you everything about EC Comics. Why? Because they were a close-knit family. I can tell you who edited this. Al Feldstein edited this. Al Feldstein wrote this. Graham Ingalls penciled and inked it. Colored by Mary Saran and lettered by Jim Broughton and his wife. We know this because these guys were family. We know every EC comic was lettered by Jim Broughton and his wife.
Wow. I
we
would
know
love
this.
This is dope. That's what I'm just thinking though. Just that color, top color that we're using behind it. I'm just curious with color choices.
Now,
colors have to do with me.
Okay,
with emotion.
I'm going to suppose, like taking a look at the page while Chris was getting into the family there. So like where you've got the yellow text boxes, you tend to have like this blue color behind them, and so that's going to come out a little bit more. But the next panel is a bit more yellow, and so I think that might have been why they switched it up, because it doesn't appear to be a different character or a different voice talking.
It's not. That's why I was curious.
No, it's the same. It's the same. It's they usually had the narrator talking, and this is such a beautiful story. I mean, the dead come from their graves, but not in a manner to be frightening, but to pay tribute to this child between a werewolf and a vampire. Is this not the best thing you've ever read? I mean, this has such a huge influence on me, how I view traditional evil characters, how the devil can be good. I mean, this is just, think about it, the beauty of ugliness. It's so perfect.
And look at this cover.
Speaking of the beauty of ugliness.
Yeah, and this is the cover to Graham Ingalls' most famous story. If you look for Graham Ingalls, this story, which we will see in a minute, is really the standout, because this is so good. Because this is the idea of these brothers, or this one brother who kills everybody who comes to the house, and then they all come back as one body, but the body's not put together right. Or they come back, but their bodies they dismembered the bodies, and they're not put together right. And this is such a showcase for Graham Ingalls. This swamp setting. Even Stephen King gives this story a shout out in his book.
I was about to say Stephen King must have read these comics, because there's I see so much that he's pulled from these stories.
Yeah, especially in his early short stories. There's a huge EC Comics influence in his earlier work. And if you talked about Rick Crandall,
I was going to say that last panel, if you can, like, as far as where, you have Bernie getting his influences from.
It's so very evident.
Yeah, which is so funny, because a lot of people do not even remember Graham Ingalls anymore.
But actually, just for a second, like, isn't that something that it's almost as though we as a community only seemed to be able to hold on to a handful of people that were willing to carry forth and remember. And, you know, probably will always remember Jack Kirby because, you know, Disney will keep him alive. Kirby will, all those characters he's created will be reinvented and reinvented and reinvented, and they'll have Captain America in 500 years from now. But, and the Fantastic Four. But I think, you know, until someone decides to do, you know, what I'd love to see is the top, like some of the best animators doing a series, an anthology series of EC, where we get to adapt some of these stories, top class animation, really good stuff.
I mean, there's it's an interesting thought because, like, yeah, with Kirby, I can see it because he was so prolific. I mean, he worked on everything, everywhere. And when I think of absolutely brilliant artists like Alan Davis, who clearly was inspired by Neil Adams, when I look at the two of them, and Alan is every bit as much of a genius as Neil, but he, if you're not a comic geek, you just don't really know who Alan Davis is, even though he's worked on some of the most important stuff out there, like Miracle Man.
Well, I think the problem with, as far as Alan Davis is concerned, is he's not producing much right now because he's got a really bad wrist, which means that so he can draw very little because sometimes the joint will just go out, and that's him not drawing for another month.
Yeah, we've got short attention spans, it seems.
So he's got to like draw, and he draws very slowly, does little bits here and there, does covers. He did the Miracle Man omnibus cover. But it is sad. It's just like you get someone who gets to that point who's just so amazing, and then nature strikes.
I mean, he's one of those people whose work I study to try and improve my own. I mean, it's just beautiful, beautiful stuff.
Look at these panels. Look at this panel. Okay. I love these panel layouts.
No, this is George Evans again. This is just how good he is. We saw him earlier in this other story, but this is so good. And this is also the new writers coming in, Carl Wessler, who tried to have a EC reboot as a magazine with George Tuska in the 50s, because before there was Warren magazine, Carl Wessler and George Tuska tried to get something off the ground. There were people who were trying to bring back EC Comics, and a lot of people do not associate some of the writers with EC Comics. Otto Binder, Carl Wessler. If you read their stuff, I mean, Al Fleischer was a good writer, and he came up with a lot of ideas. I mean, he jumped off the plots Bill Gaines gave him, who Bill Gaines took from some novels because he couldn't really sleep. But at the end of the day, Carl Wessler is a fantastic writer. Otto Binder is one of my favorite writers in comic books ever.
Okay.
So good.
I've got to hand it again to the artists who can do these 9-panel things. Like Gibbons on Watchmen, obviously, in the previous panel we just looked at. Because I'm looking at this, and as an artist, that kind of thing would drive me crazy. Drawing all these teeny tiny little panels, trying to.
You just wait for it. You just wait for it.
You should see the comic I'm working on right now.
Wait for Bernie Kriegstein.
Yeah, and because as an artist, you've got to leave room for dialogue too. And so you're just, how do I scrunch it all down and still make it impactful?
And what is so amazing here? The captions were written before there was anything on the page, because Al Feldstein was writing 4 comic books, a full comic book a week. And what he did, he was writing the dialogue, the captions directly on the artboard, and he ruled the page. So that was what the artist got. They got the caption and the ruled pages. And
then so the artist knew exactly what he was working with. Now that does make an important difference, because I grew up kind of working the Marvel method sort of thing. I'd like draw my stuff out, and then my pencils start ballooning stuff out and trying to figure out my spacing and whatnot.
This is, by the way, this is Johnny Craig. Just a second. This is Johnny Craig, by the way.
Beautiful.
Well, like just as Kurtzman used to do layouts for his artists. You look at the work of Keith Giffen. Keith Giffen would, like Lobo, Justice League. He did all the layouts for those. So Adam Hughes, Kevin Maguire, Simon Bisley, worked from those layouts. And,
Yeah.
and as an artist, you probably know, it's like, you know, there's a difference between a blank page and even just having rough thumbnails.
No, it makes a huge difference. Like right now, I'm working on a comic project for ASAP Comics with one of our other Comic Crusaders, DT, David Taylor.
ASAP Imagination, kiddo. Wherever.
There you go. And DT actually, he's got his panel layouts in mind, so that's actually going to save me a tremendous amount of time because I don't have to figure out how he wants the page or like. And you know, I'm free to make suggestions if I think something's going to flow better visually, because you know that's my end of things. But just not having to figure out my page layout is actually kind of a huge boon.
Yeah, man. I'm sure. I'm sure.
And this is also. I mean, we were talking horror comics here. We're not talking about as what we would call these days woke comics, but you see, really, were the first who really tackled issues like racism, like bigots, and
I hate
inequality.
I hate when they say the word woke when it happens to be a person dealing with racism. Why we're woke? I'm a victim of it. So I'm woke because I'm a victim of it? Fuck you. Can I use that word on the regular? That shit is the real thing. It's not about being woke. It's a real thing. I've experienced it. And don't tell me.
But you like, come on, like, are you going to get into critical race theory and all that
Oh,
stuff?
no. Well, don't you even dare there, because again, there's a lot of stories that are not told. I could show you books on Puerto Rican history about things that happened to my people that I never learned about when I was going to school, my brother. And I
can appreciate that. I can appreciate that,
but
I appreciate that, but let me make this point. There is a difference between telling a story and telling an important story, and then trying to force feed somebody an agenda. We've seen it happen incredibly well. We've seen it done in Star Trek over the years. We've seen it done in many other types of media. It can be done, but if you're going to beat somebody over the head with a large blunt object, you're going to turn them off.
Not beat anyone over the head, but all I'll say is this: history is supposedly written by the winners, right? So when that happens, we will never get the full truth, and I'll leave it at that.
I don't think that anyone should beat anybody over the head or anything. I think if you just teach history and everything that happened as it is, and you know, it's like growing up in England. It's like every country gets the history taught that's relevant to their own country, and not necessarily,
of course,
how it connects anywhere else.
Yeah, man.
Exactly.
But there are things like, I mean, you know, Britain's got probably the worst history of any country ever.
All right. I want to say this though, because I saw this little Twitter post about people talking about the U.S. or U.S. terrorists and countries they bombed, but they left one out. They actually bombed Puerto Rico to put us in check when they walked in after the Spanish-American War to take over our country. They bombed the town in southern Puerto Rico. That was the first time the American government bombed something that belonged to them. But no one mentions that shit at all. I was looking at that list. I'm like, wow, y'all missing one.
Well, it's not the only time America's actually bombed its own.
Of course.
No. But just let me make one point. I mean, I remember when the Watchmen TV series came on HBO a year, 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
that was the first time, and I was not alone because a lot of people discussed this, when the Tulsa race massacre scene really started the series, and I really hadn't heard about this, and I began to learn more about this, that they were using fucking biplanes to erase a black neighborhood from a town only because these guys were successful. And this is really something where I say, okay, is this hitting me over the head? It's a very heavy-handed scene, yes, but it got me researching this and thinking about this. And if you really have a problem with strong female characters, if you have problems with minorities, do not read my books, because I do not have white male protagonists, because I grew up in the 80s and I hated these guys. I do not like these protagonists.
So you're a racist.
So many books. No, I'm not a racist. I'm not a racist, but I choose who I make the heroes of my books. And I'm not interested in telling the 10,000 books with a white male hero. I have no interest in that. As an artist, what you do is totally up to you. But I have seen so many movies about this. I am not interested in
there
that.
is absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever.
Exactly.
And
that's why thank you, Chris.
And that's what I hate about what's going on with the creatives now is like people telling you what you can and can't create when we should be free to create what we want.
Yes, of course. Whatever you love.
Yeah, but it's also. I mean, if you have black characters in your artwork, are you not going to address the theme of racism? Of course you are, because basically you have to have these characters, white characters, react to these black characters, and there's always racism. I'm racist. We are all racist. We all make mistakes. We want to be better every day, and this is not hitting people over the head. This is part of the history.
Life is life.
No, I'm certainly not denying history. As a matter of fact, I'm all for truth. When it becomes an ideology, it's a problem because I will deal with racism and other things in my own work because that is a part of the human condition. As humans, we are inherently flawed, and we've got to live with those flaws every day, be it from individuals all the way to nations to globally.
And talking about the 1950s and why these EC comics became the most dangerous comics ever published.
Yes.
This is one of the best stories EC comic book has ever published. This is
what a segue, folks! What a segue!
Out by Reed Crandall, written by Carl Wessler. This is the story of an underage girl who gets raped, and the guy says, "Well, basically, if you talk about this, I'm going to kill you." And stay on this page, please. And as it turns out, they get the town derelicts and they lynch him because everybody says this is the guy, and it's the sheriff. It's the white sheriff. And in the end, one of the most frightening panels I've ever seen. In the end, the girl ends up in the car of the sheriff and says, "Don't worry, everything will stay the same." So he's going to rape her again and again. This is a comic book from the 1950s.
Oh, that's horrifying.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Because of course, like, who are you going to believe, the sheriff or her?
Exactly. And who's going to question the sheriff? Nobody.
Well, you know what? This Puerto Rican would question the law all day, every day. Because I've been through enough shit myself.
I remember the story. There's a story in EC Comics where you in the 1950s where they have a black prisoner, and they drive him because the DA says to the sheriff, "We have nothing on him."
Oh, wow.
And the sheriff says, "No problem. I will drive him into the woods." And they take off the chains and say, "You run now, son," and then they shoot him.
What motherfuckers? Wow.
See, that's the thing about EC, which was so important. Is yes, we had a lot of stories where the bad guy would get their comeuppance, but there was just so many stories where it was the horror was actually the reality of what actually happens in real life.
I'm actually very much in favor of that too, because as much as I like to see the good guys win, as much as like anybody, I want to see the good ending where we have the feel good at the end. I also, as a horror aficionado, I like the dark, dreadful endings because, you know, life isn't all sunshine and cupcakes. Bad things happen. And that needs to be reflected in our art as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is one of the twists in my horror book series. It's basically the devil is one of the main characters, but the devil doesn't do so many horrible things. It's just looking at the human race and say, well, basically, you call me bad?
The devil's just an enabler.
Yeah, to some degree. This is Bernie Krickstein. And this is once again an artist who is so advanced. I mean, this is we could put this out in the 70s and nobody would bat an eye at this. Oh, yeah, it's a great comic book page. This is in the 50s. This is Bernie Krickstein.
I love this layout. Look at the detail of
the layout.
Nails in the bottom of this shoe.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people, it's the easy go-to where they say, "Oh, Frank Miller on Daredevil, that's very Eisner influence." He's more Eisner influence as far as the story goes. But if you look at this is Miller influenced by Bernie Krickstein. Yeah. Bernie Krickstein was a huge influence on Frank Miller.
Look at the amount of panels on this page, folks.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
And this is just
16 panels. Holy crap!
on one
Mhm.
page. Who the fuck does that nowadays? No one. No
Yeah, but
one.
this is also a fantastic story because what you get here is there's this police detective who is charged with bringing a criminal to justice who takes the heads off his victims, and he sees this guy with this bag and he's chasing him, and the guy doesn't understand what the guy wants from him. He's afraid. There's this guy with the gun running after him, and the cop shoots him in the back, and in the end there's a bowling ball in his back.
Oof. Wow.
And what you see here is this breakdown of the cop. He's really he gets the pressure. He must bring this guy to justice, and it's just a tragic story. I mean, it's so
Look at
good.
this though. I mean, beautiful panel work, classic comics.
Mm.
This is what I miss. This is what was worth my money. Well, it would take me a goddamn half hour to read a fucking book because you're not just reading, but you're appreciating each and every panel and soaking it in. I mean, a page like this would probably take me 5 minutes to just soak in appreciation. That's just one page.
And look at the beautiful use of black in here.
Yes.
Also the brilliant coloring because
black, blues, grays, yellows, everything.
You've got a dramatic story, but it's still framed very much in horror because the way that this is illustrated. You can feel this guy's fear as he's running for his life.
The use of the shadows definitely creates that mood.
Yeah, this is like it makes me think of one of my all-time favorite artists, especially horror artists, was Gene Colan on Tomb of Dracula.
Boss legend, salute Colan.
Yeah, but this is one of the most important story EC ever put out. It's called Master Race. It's called Master Race, and this is a story. I mean, this is even before Marathon Man in the 70s. There is this guy who rides the subway, and you think, oh, he's our hero, and then you suddenly realize, oh no. That guy is a Nazi who escaped punishment. He's in New York. He's riding the subway. And he only sees this old guy there. And he says, oh, that was one of my prisoners. And he gets so afraid, he runs away. And in the end, the guy says, I have no idea who that guy was.
Oh, shit.
That guilt eating him up.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the panel usage again there. You know, a lot of action. You know, it just definitely rides your eye, man.
I like that too because it's also very indicative of the times. Like I would see stories like this watching The Twilight Zone with Rod Serling.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Explored a lot of similar themes.
I mean, look at this. Flo, come quickly. I mean, not on Flo. Nobody wants that.
Well, she is a redhead.
Okay. This is where we all started. I mean, this is Al Feldstein again as an artist. I mean, he wrote a lot of these stories, but this is Al Feldstein, who is really a good artist. A lot of people give him shit because everything looks very cute, looks very, very. What is the word for it? Looks very crude, but Al Feldstein was also very good artist.
This is gorgeous. What are they talking about?
It's got a little bit of
like this.
A little bit of a Carmine Infantino vibe to me.
Very blocky. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Listen, bro, my sister-in-law likes the fourth panel. Very funny.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, destruction of the earth.
Feldstein. Very good.
That's what happens anytime somebody eats tacos.
Mm-hmm.
I love this kind of things, like when you do the black and white and you can just commit using line work for effect. I love this.
This is so good. I mean, these guys were really one of a kind. And this is Al Feldstein again drawing women. This is how he started.
Very nice.
Very nice.
Look at this. Again, and look at the movement of these panels too. You know what I mean? Isn't that fire? Wow.
Actually,
and this is where it ended, because this is one of the most notorious covers ever. Because this was when we come back in 2 weeks' time, we will talk about the hearings of the House and congressional hearings, Senate hearings on comic books.
Oh yeah.
And this is the cover that was discussed with Bill Gates. He was the only publisher who wanted to give testimony to the committee, and he was famously asked if he thought this cover was in good taste, and he said yes, it was in good taste because you don't see her neck, and he was done after that.
And you know, this is not unlike anything you would have seen in a movie poster.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, kids went to the movies too. They would have seen movie posters similar to this. If you're going to see your Disney film, you still see the crime thriller movie poster. You would still see stuff like this. And you know, obviously, you know, somebody saw an opportunity, somebody had an agenda, and then we ended up with
And the
decades.
irony being, this is one of my favorite stories, which is actually not by Johnny Craig who did the cover, but it's by Reed Crandall who drew this, and they're professionally wrote this. This is about the story about a guy who murders his wife, and he wants to be with a younger woman. So we have the breakdown of the nuclear family, and they go to New York. They have a good time, and they go to as guests to this game show, and they are picked as winners on this live TV program. And they say, "Oh, you're the winner now," and "Oh, what did we win? Oh, you're getting a swimming pool. We're digging up your garden. This is for the parts of the wife." I mean, it's such a great story.
I love it. That's great.
It's so wonderful. Okay, guys, thank you very much. As these gentlemen did, please, if you want to learn more about horrors, read my columns. They are Comic Crusaders and the Comic Book Confidential. But do not shy away from buying my book, because I have to make rent like everybody else.
Yeah, so right there, folks, you can go to Amazon right now and get the Neon Graveyard. Please pick it up. This is Crispy's debut novel of a trilogy.
Book 1 in the series.
Yeah, man.
Exactly. Book two is coming this summer.
Yeah, man. I mean,
a trilogy, no less.
Yeah,
It's a trilogy. Yes, it's a trilogy.
Chris stayed busy, but what's great about today, folks, so you guys understand, this is part 1, right? This was pre-code talk.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the next one, we're going to talk about books like this that was post-code.
Mm-hmm.
All right? We're going to enjoy stuff like this because, listen, this is pre-code that's being reprinted finally, because who cares about the Comics Code Authority nowadays anyway?
Mm-hmm.
So they're re-releasing this stuff. But as Chris said, you can go to platforms like Asylum. You go to platforms like SourcePoint Press. There's digital mediums right now where you can get the books for free because it is in the public domain. So, go enjoy this amazing content, this amazing stories that are going to inspire the next great generation. Bracy, thank you for jumping in.
Hey, thanks for the invite. I was really glad to be here.
Now, I know, but I know you love horror, and I know there was no other person that I have here talking about these covers than you. And I know, Dave, bro, you got fucking into your shit that you forgot about your family for a minute. How dare you? So, but
what can I say?
Give me 1 minute on that, though, at least. Talk about that. What are you working on that you ignored your family for almost a half hour?
Well, I'm working on my top secret graphic novel that I wrote.
Hey.
Nice. Let's
see the artboard back there.
I know. Don't you see it?
Oh, look at this world exclusive now.
Wait a minute.
Wow, look at this beautiful art. This looks so good, Dave. Excellent. I love this.
Bro.
So
this is wonderful.
Oh,
This is
Dave's
wonderful.
Raise the bar for me. Look at that. See, that's what happens when
he
you see
is.
other people's art.
This is so amazing.
Better.
It's penciled by a really good friend of mine who we've worked together on several projects, and but it's the first time I actually inked him. His name's Gary Gastoni.
It looks so clean.
So good.
That looks
so good.
doggone clean.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't it? So, Chris, now we can forgive Dave. That's beautiful work.
It was in the zone. I was in that zone.
Yeah, I know this. I do know this.
It's kind of funny, Al. It's like just like when I realized I had that notification, I was actually in the middle of drawing a commission.
You too?
Yes, here you go.
I love this. Comic Crusaders is full of creative. So, folks, if you want to get some work done, if you need people, I have people here that are willing to do some work that are probably, I know Brace is open for work. So, guys, if you're looking for an amazing artist, to partake in your journey, Bracy is the man. Hit us up at Comic Crusaders. I'll pinpoint you to Bracy. But, of course, be on the lookout for Chris, not just with the Neon Graveyard, but be on the lookout for Volume 2 coming soon. He's going to be teasing the shit out of it. Visit the, Comic Book Confidential column series on Comic Crusaders. Believe you me, you're going to love it. You're going to learn some shit. Because for me, that is college. That's another comic book college right there. And with Dave, he keeps kicking ass. He's doing what he do. Thank you for joining, brother. Even though you were late, but we understand the passion, bro. We understand the passion.
I'll be early next time.
Let's not forget to shout out Mr. Al Mega himself, who brought us all
come
together.
on.
Like
Exactly.
7 years now at Comic Crusaders.
Yeah, I mean, as a website, we're killing it as that, and we're building. We keep marching forward because we're here to celebrate people like you. independent.
And do you want to know what else? Do you want to know what else secret is, and what the secret of Comic Crusaders is? Positivity. Because
That's
we're
it.
not here to talk down to any creator. We are here to encourage the medium, to help the fandom, and we are positive about things.
And look at that. We even had discussion right here on the stream, differing opinions, and we are still friends. We still respect each other.
No problem.
Nobody lost their minds about anything. Even
Why should I?
Wildly different.
No.
That's
all
how
right.
it should be.
Yeah, man, exactly. Listen, to each their own. We could agree to disagree, but I still love you. You know what I mean? And it's okay.
Absolutely.
Because again, wouldn't the world be boring if everybody was on the same level?
Absolutely.
To be honest, I mean, it really would be boring. And this is what I love about my family. We could have differing opinions. Why should I get mad at you? It's okay. You feel that way. I feel my way. You know what? Let's just still create and have some fun in doing what we do. And it's okay. Because again, I really believe in that. If everybody felt the same way, I think the world would be really boring, and that wouldn't allow the opportunity to create reasons why we need to bridge further. So that way, one day we could have that conversation where, you know what, everybody could be like me, Bracy, Chris, Dave, where even if we disagree, it doesn't matter.
Look at how different we all are. We're all from different parts of the world, but we're all drawn together by our love of this material.
Ooh, all this beautiful stuff
brings us all together.
I mean, if we were all the same, we wouldn't be talking about horror comics today.
Exactly.
Exactly. Oh, hell yeah! Because your horror may not make my horror, but it is though, because I love any aspect of horror. If it means people are getting killed, I love it.
But also let's not forget that horror comics, or the horror genre in general, is reflective of society, and it's very inclusive in its approach.
Yeah.
It says, well, the outsiders, they are the guys who help us, and they're not the evil guys. And be nice to your neighbors.
It's so true. So with that, this is the International Comic Crusaders. Please check out everything Dave Elliott. Check out everything Chris Buse. The notes tell you our links and all. I gotta add Bracy now. Bracy, before we go, where can we check out your products? Because I know you got Mr. Happy and all that shit. So where can we pick up any books from you?
Okay, there are no books as of yet. Which
at least art.
You can find me on DeviantArt. My handle there is Bracy100, and of course on Twitter it's Bracy at Bracy452.
Awesome.
So like you'll find me posting stuff there. You'll find me posting stuff on Twitter, and I do have an Instagram, which I think is either Bracy100 or Bracy452. I try to stick to those numbers. I try to make it really easy to find me.
I get you, but thank you got a weed smoker. This is why I try to keep my shit easy. One name, because if I smoke too much, I'll tell you, and I'll be honest. But now, this is my team, folks. This is amazing people, amazing creators that just create amazing content. And at the end of the day, we're all about creating fun content, content that is diverse, things that are just about us, things that are just going to make it fun, to take you away from the narrative. There's too much crazy shit going on in the world. And I didn't even want to start talking about that. But the world is
let me just quote Ayn Rand for once. A creator doesn't create to compete with other creators, a creator creates to create.
Yes. Epa, ain't that the fucking truth? So with that, creators keep creating. People just live and live your best life. It may look like our days are limited, but I don't believe that, because I think that the greatest spirit of humanity will show and overcome. So with that, much love to all of you. Thank you, Bracy. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Dave. And thank you, each and every one of you that hang out with us every single week.
That's right.
Hasta la próxima, yo. Well, Comic Crew with the Comic Crusaders Undercover Capes. We rule. Ooh.
Thank you. We hope you've enjoyed this Comic Crusaders production. For real-time news on all things pop culture, please feel free to follow us on social media. For articles, original content, merchandise, and more, please go to www.comiccrusaders.com. Also follow along with all of the websites in the Comic Crusaders family.